You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes of Strife, the Binge original series. My name is Jessie Stevens. I'm a co-producer on Strife and I wrote episode 4 of this season, and I am joined by Mia Freedman, whose memoir Work-Strife Balance was the inspiration for the series. Mia, you are also an executive producer. Do you even know what that means, executive producer? What does
it's fancy. It means different things, whether I've learned, whether it's TV or film. But what it means is that I'm in the room where it happens.
Yes.
As Lin-Manuel Miranda would say. But I am not the executive producer. I'm one of 5.
Got it. And we have another executive producer sitting beside you, Sarah Scheller. Hello.
Hello.
Sarah is not just an executive producer. She is a writer, the big dog writer.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote episodes. And showrunner. What does showrunner mean?
Well, I mean, that's
She
another
runs the
fancy
show.
title. I mean, yes, it does. Essentially, it does mean that you run the show. It's a bit different in Australia compared to America. In America, you're probably more running the show than you do in Australia. I think the director sort of runs the show a little bit here.
With this, like you were on set.
Yes.
And you had the actor deliver the line that was written, but you're sitting there, you can kind of change it up a little as you go, right?
Yeah, and I did have to, because what you find on set is occasionally, and it's could be for a variety of reasons, some scenes aren't working. It could be due to actors or, I don't know, the lighting or the camera or the director. It's just not gelling.
Is that also because until you've heard the actors saying the lines, you might not have heard them spoken out loud?
Definitely. Yeah, sometimes jokes just don't work.
How do you feel when an actor would be on the set and then maybe give the line a little something extra? Are you ever like?
As long as it works and as long as it's tonally right for the show. Some actors are really great at doing that and others are not so great.
Yeah.
It's a comedy, and if someone gets a laugh, then they think they're really good at it and keep going. But generally what you do is you definitely get the script. So you shoot the script and you might do a few takes of that, and then often the director will say, okay, let's loosen it up. Let's have some fun with this. And that's when an actor can really feel free. I mean, I found on Strife most of the actors were very loyal to the script, and Asha is as well. She's such a pro and she interrogates the script, absolutely, but she will say the words that's on the page.
Yeah.
And if she has any problems with them, we sort of workshop that. And so often that is on set. So, but she's also been involved in pre-production.
And she's an executive producer too.
I was going to
She
say,
is,
Asha is not, wasn't an actor that showed up on day one. She was involved in this project all throughout.
I wanted to ask about this, Sarah, about the hierarchy, right, of all the people, because one of the
Mia
things
still doesn't understand.
I still don't understand. So one of the things that was giving me anxiety at first, and I don't know if I'm sure you remember, the first meeting we had after Asha was cast, after everyone was in place, was you, me, the 3 producers, of course, Bruna, Asha, Jessie and Claire. I think that's all. And I kept saying to Bruna, or maybe I said it to you, I don't understand who's in charge. I said it to Asha as well. I said, I'm very anxious because am I in charge? Because I hope I'm not, because I don't know what the hell is going on. But I want to know who's the biggest dog in the room. And you all said to me, Bruna.
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, it's at different stages of the project that different people step up. So, for example, pre-production, you've got your line producer who's really calling the shots, and they're controlling the budget, and they're telling you that location you can't shoot at because we can't afford it, or that one's fine. So they have a lot of power in those sort of early days. We're doing the writer's room. I feel like I'm in charge of that domain. And then even as we're sort of finalising the scripts, usually it's 3 drafts and a polish, and then the writers kind of hand them over because they've done their contractual obligations, and then it's up to me sort of working with the producers and the cast to get those scripts locked off to a shooting script. Then when we step onto set, it's Asha, because she's number 1 on the call sheet and she's an executive producer and she's Asha Keddy. She has incredible power, but it's the director as well. So it's Stuart Bowen, who is our director. He controls the set, and I'm there as a support to him and as an EP, and also as a support for Asha. I think she really likes having a writer on set. And it was incredible to actually feel like I certainly wasn't wasting my time on set, because often you're sitting around on set and there's nothing to do.
You were busy.
But I was busy and it was really great.
Oh, I had nothing to do.
No, what
That's
you were
fine.
eating all the
I
snacks.
drank tea. The food is so good.
food
The
is
catering is amazing.
So
And
that's a relief for people listening that you were not the director.
I know how to be in charge when I feel confident in what I'm doing, but if I don't feel confident and I don't know, then I really need to not be in charge and I need to be told everyone else has got this. And Ashley just kept saying, because I kept saying, I don't understand how everyone decides if there's a conflict, whose voice wins, because there seems to be so many amazing voices. And she said, I don't know how it works, but it just works. And
That's
it did.
true. It did. I mean, it's kind of majority consensus, but we never really had any major disagreements. So we were very fortunate in that sense.
Is that normal?
No. Not in my experience. So we were very lucky. And, it was a lot of strong women.
Yeah.
And it just worked.
It felt as though everyone had a shared vision. And I should say before we get into it as well, Sarah, you wrote The Letdown, which is one of my favourite Australian series ever.
Was it your favourite series before you had a child?
I really liked it before, and then I had a child and I rewatched it and I went, oh, this is very good. This is very, very good.
Because sometimes people go the other way and go, no, once they've had a child, it's like,
too close.
It's too close.
Oh, it is brilliant.
It's a documentary.
And what I wanted to ask was initially, what attracted you to Strife?
Well, I mean, I love female forward shows. So Mia's book was sent to me when I was still living in LA. It was actually during lockdown, so I had plenty of time on my hands. And I really enjoyed it. I was aware of Mia. We'd never met. I knew about Mamamia, but I really related to it. I found it not only a really useful guide for working women, but I found all the parenting stuff. I love that. I love reading about the juggle and how mums do it. Actually, a lot of the humour reminded me of The Letdown.
Yeah.
And my kids were at an age then that was similar to, I think, your two eldest around that time. I just really enjoyed it. So I straight away got back to Bruna and said I'd love to get involved. And then you were involved as well, Jessie and Claire, straight away. We did a small little Zoom room from LA.
During COVID.
COVID. And then started developing it, and also the attraction of working with made-up stories was big as well. But no, I loved what it offered as well. There was something challenging about it, which I really liked. And I was really interested in female bosses, the standards to which they're held. I thought there was some really interesting territory.
Before we get into it, Stripe was developed by production company Made Up Stories. You might have heard the names Bruna Papandrea and Jodie Mattison. They make female shows, female stories with female creators. Big Little Lies, you might have seen, was their latest big one, as well as Nine Perfect Strangers. Some of the best Aussie television and film you've seen in the last few years was definitely made by Made Up Stories. Strife was directed by Stuart Bowen, and the writer's room consisted of myself and Sarah, as well as Romina Accurso, Claire Stevens, Andy Healy, and Lexi Freeman. So what we're going to do is, across 3 episodes, we're going to go behind the scenes of this 8-part series, unpicking what's based on true events, what isn't, the Easter eggs you might have missed, the conversations that unfolded in the writer's room, and what it was like on set. The series begins with Evelyn being plagued by a sense of failure. She's suffering from writer's block while trying to build Eve life. I reckon the first question that people are going to have when they watch this is, Mia, have you ever suffered from writer's block? Is this based on you? Have you gone through a period where you can't write?
I have, actually, now that I think about it. At the time that I did, not that I couldn't think of anything to write, but that I was too scared to write it. There have been 2 times in my life. One was after I left Channel 9, and it was like this so humiliating, and my reputation was just trashed and my self-esteem was in the toilet, and it was the biggest professional failure of my life. And it wasn't that I was worried that I wouldn't be able to write well. It wasn't about that. It was about that I was terrified that anything I said would be turned into a gossip story and weaponized and be made into more fodder for this narrative of Mia Freedman is a complete disastrous failure. So what I didn't realise, of course, is that I was only interesting to the media when I was working at Channel 9, because it's Channel 9 that was interesting. It wasn't me. Once I was spat out by the machine, they couldn't give a stuff about what I say on a blog unless I was going to go and trash Channel 9, which I didn't, which would have been a story. So at first when I started Mamamia, I just published old newspaper columns that I'd written, like putting them on the internet. And it took me a while to get my confidence back. And then the second time was after a really bad cancellation where I was, again, just really scared of the scrutiny. And it's hard because when you're a writer and you write to process things, it's how I process work out what I think and everything. When you become the story, it takes it into a different realm.
Yeah.
So you've always got to have that filter. How could this be used
And it's
against
funny
me?
because with writing, they say you've got to turn off the inner critic. And it's like, how about the external critic who is at my door telling me that I
about
am
Twitter?
evil? Sarah, have you ever had writer's block? You're a writer.
I am a huge procrastinator. I think that's a form of writer's block.
Yeah.
I'll do things like alphabetize my book collection when I've got a deadline. But I mean, being a TV writer, you've always got a deadline. So you do
it's quick.
have to get things out. And my producers who are listening will go, well, you don't meet your deadlines, but that's true. But yeah, so I do. I have, but you've just got to keep the ideas coming. You just have to try and work through it. And I also say, to Mia's point, like I think it is such a trope, the writer's block for a writer. And so we did try and, even though she is blocked in episode 1, it's just that she hasn't unlocked the right story. So she hasn't written something from the heart yet. And I think this was from Mia's anxiety article that she wrote, that when she does release herself by the end of the pilot and writes that one confessional piece, everything changes. It's a blockage of sorts, but it's not, she's still writing other things. She just hasn't written the article
That she's, trying not
that she
to.
wants to write, but it's just, she just can't tap into it.
Have you had writer's block, Jessie?
Yeah. And I think that that's always interesting to me when you're a writer who can't write.
Do you know why you've had writer's block and I haven't? Because you're a better writer than me.
No. It's
And you also, Sarah, and I say that in all honesty, I'm not fishing for compliments. It's because I am so not wedded to the idea of perfection. When I did a newspaper column, I always had a deadline to meet. Or when I had magazines, like there was a deadline that existed outside of me. And then on the internet, when I had to write 6 posts a day for Mamamia, it's a muscle. And if you get anxious, and I'm not saying you allow yourself to be blocked, but it's like external pressure for me is a good thing. And so I just vomit. And if it's not great, oh, well, I know I'm going to write 17 more things by this time next week.
I mean, the pressure is enormous because she now has this, and that's the stakes are set up there, that she's got this business that she has to run and she's got to make profitable, and she's the face of it. And we go into our first pitch meeting. Mia, I'm not sure if you remember this, but there is a line from Christine in episode 1 that is verbatim from an ex-editor at Mamamia. It's one of my favourite lines.
Was it me? No.
No, it wasn't you. But she said, if you wrote a story and no one clicked on it, did you even write the story? Do you remember that being said?
Yeah. I don't, but it's one of my favourite lines. Did you put that in? I love that so much because it's true.
It's
Yes.
true. And can you explain to people who don't understand digital media, like we look like click monsters who need the clicks.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the model, right? Like you can write as many stories about environmentalism in the case of Jeet, but if no one clicks, you're not getting the ads, like as in people aren't getting through to the ads, and you can't sustain yourself. So as brutal as that sounds, you've had to have that conversation with a lot of editors.
Yeah, and a lot of writers, because
Yeah.
there's this idea, particularly because Mamamia is purpose-based and it's to make the world a better place for women, that people think, right, well, I need to write a story about something terrible happening to a woman somewhere, or, you know, something that's going to make the world a better place for women. Environmental story is a great example. And it's not just about the sustainability of it, because it's got to achieve a big enough audience to be able to make revenue so that you can pay the bills and keep making more content. It's also, to me, a click is not just a metric of how much money you can make. It's a metric of how many people are interested and have engaged with what you've written. So you can write an incredible story, but if no one reads it, what was the point? You could have just gone and written that in your diary. So it's not to say, oh, it means no one's interested in environmental stories. It just means that you have to find a different way to make people click, to make people engage. There's this idea that a click or making someone click is a bad thing.
Or manipulative, yeah.
But it's the same thing that a book cover has to be engaging
trailer,
enough,
yeah.
or a trailer for someone to go and watch the movie. Like it's not a bad thing having a good headline.
And Sarah, you had to immerse yourself in this world entirely, and it's absolute chaos. Like, what did you learn about this world? What did you think about it as you were building it?
I learned so much. I learned so much from you and Claire and Mia, and also Emma Carmichael, who was a Jezebel editor, who was in our first room.
Yeah.
And I've just been blown away by the knowledge that you guys have and how whip smart everybody is and how quick at getting these stories out.
What knowledge about what? What do we have knowledge about? Like genuinely, what do you think?
Everything. Like I think there's that line in the pilot as well. I think it's Opal that says, we're generalists. We know a little bit about everything.
Yeah.
Because you kind of have to. If I bring up any topic to Jessie or Claire, I just get a very funny political quip very quickly. But like it's just extraordinary.
Because you have to just immerse yourself in culture.
Wide and shallow.
Yeah.
Because our filter is what women are talking about. So if you're making content for women, women have such a broad interest area.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think we were told once by an editor that if your story takes you, an hour to write, like your headline should be taking you almost that long because that's the investment in getting people to click. And you want that as a writer too. Sarah, I wanted to ask you about wardrobe because a lot of people are going to wonder, and we've spoken to Mia about this. Mia dresses one way, Evelyn dresses another. What story is Evelyn's wardrobe telling? Like, why was that decision made?
I think once we decided to fictionalise the character and fictionalise the office, we needed to differentiate Evelyn from Mia.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to do that is through wardrobe. And if we didn't do that, it could have been confusing.
And almost like caricature-ish.
Yeah, I think if Evelyn had dressed the way Mia dressed, it would have been confusing. It would have been like, hang on a minute, that is Mia. And so we had a lot of discussion about this. I mean, Asha does a real deep dive into her characters. She spends a lot of time sculpting them, thinking about the way that they talk, how they sound, what they wear. Look, in terms of that wardrobe, I don't think there was much on the page. I really think she does a lot of that on her own in quiet time.
And I think she did a lot of interrogating of the story because I remember there would be certain things, like I remember the divorce with John was a big thing for her. She needed to understand it.
Yes.
And there were such valid questions, but she was so in the head of that character. Like she understands narrative just so well.
Yeah. And I think also when we had discussions about Evelyn's wardrobe, because she was a magazine editor, so not long ago. So she would have a wardrobe of designer pieces. And even though there's, not as much of a reason to wear those clothes anymore, she wouldn't discard them until episode 8 when she does discard a few of them. But, she'd still be wearing those. But I don't think she was quite in the super cash digital space yet with her wardrobe.
No, and this is one area that I was overruled where I was so happy to be overruled. And in anything I was overruled in, I was happy because I know the least in the room invariably. But in my mind, I didn't think she necessarily needed to wear sequins, but I was such a fan of Sex and the City and the way that fashion was a character that I just assumed that we would need that. Like I couldn't see Evelyn, and that was before I'd seen what Asha did with Evelyn, right? I hadn't seen Asha as Evelyn. So to me, I think it still was in a way me, but that was so powerful. And I can see now that if Evelyn had dressed in the way that I had imagined that she would before I saw it, it would have been distracting.
She's got a bit of a masculine energy in season 1, and I think she will in season 2 as well. But she's acting like a bit of a man. Like she's left the marriage, she's left the family home, she's doing it on her own.
She's very alpha. She's got to be very alpha.
She's very alpha,
Yeah.
and she's in this second phase of her career. So I think it kind of works that she's just functional.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, utilitarian.
Mia, I have to ask you about the tampon story. There is a tampon storyline in this which had everyone gasping. Have you ever packed a dirty tampon in your handbag and had it shown on live television?
I'm sure I've packed a dirty tampon in my handbag. Hasn't every woman? I mean, hasn't every woman had that kind of moment? Although I would have wrapped it in tissue, I think.
Yeah. I think she had, but it just come a bit
It
loose.
bled through.
That happens. I've not had that happen on live TV, but what I loved about that scene, and I laughed out loud so much when I saw it, and I think Claire was the one that came up
Claire
with
liked
that
the tampon
She
scene,
idea.
yeah.
I gasped and I burst out laughing because I'd never seen anything like it, but it was so true to the number of times I've been asked to do things I was really uncomfortable with, and I played along because I didn't want to seem like a bitch or a diva.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And Lincoln plays that so well in
The
that
TV
scene,
host, yeah.
like just grabbing her bag.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, why do I have to play your stupid game? But a funny thing about shooting that scene was our props guy was blooding up the tampon. And
What did he use for the
Well,
blood?
a fake blood, but he just kind of like dipped the end of it in just like a little bit of bright
honey.
red. And I was like, no, that's not.
She's not spotting.
More blood. More blood.
Yeah.
And so, okay. So he put some more blood. No, darker blood. More. And he's just like wincing, going,
Clots.
oh, no.
Where are the
where are the clots? And then Asha came over. She goes like, no, more blood. And so this poor guy was just horrified.
And it's this big inflatable, like, bloody tampon. Would have loved it.
Yeah, he's like, it's getting bigger. I'm like, that's what happens.
It had to be massive. Sarah, I wanted to ask, at the end of this episode, there's a beautiful scene where Alex asks his mum why the marriage ended, and he asks about whether it was infidelity. And I remember this going around, and Asher was involved in these discussions about what the backstory to the end of that marriage. Why was it not infidelity or something explosive? Like, why was the choice made for it to be, I just fell out of love?
Yeah, I think we all spoke about this really early on because we wanted to do something surprising. We wanted to flip that stereotype of, oh, the marriage is over because he or she had an affair. It just seemed really boring, and we've been there before. So there was something really empowering about even keeping it a little bit ambiguous, that she's kind of impulsive as well. So it's kind of on brand for Evelyn to leave her marriage and then go, oh shit, why did I do that?
I can't remember.
I think essentially, and it's Alex in that scene who helps her crystallize why she did it or what was the moment. He sort of brings up this moment when she got his coffee order wrong. Oh, she ordered him a flat white, and he changed to long blacks 2 years before. And so it just highlights for Evelyn that she stopped paying attention to him and she stopped caring. And that was the moment when she just sort of fell out of love with him and just moved on.
And it makes a great headline.
Yeah, so then exactly, it does make a great headline.
Brilliant headline.
But I left my marriage over a flat white. I wanted to ask about the scene before that, which I found so affecting. Evelyn comes to pick up the kids to spend the night at her new apartment for the first time. She arrives and Addie decides she doesn't want to go, and then Alex, her son, says, I'll come. And then when he's going to get his stuff, and the way Asher played that with how you can see her face just fall and she's crushed, but then she knows that as a mother she needs to make it okay for her daughter.
She stands up so straight,
I found that so moving. But then the kids leave and he says, hey, is that my shirt? And she just wordlessly takes it off, pushes it at him and just strides out the door in her bra. And then you see her driving home still in her bra with Alex next to her. I mean, the part in the car was quite funny, but I can't even explain why I found it so affecting. Where does that come from?
Well, I guess the idea behind that was that he's taking everything, the shirt off her back. Like, he's got the kids in the house, even though this was, yes, it's all her decision. Yeah. But we've been so indoctrinated to think that women can't have wants. Like, and every character needs a want. For female characters, often it's, well, they've got a good husband, they've got kids, they've got a nice family home.
What's she complaining about?
What's she complaining about, and why could she possibly want more? But she does. She wants something else. And so in that moment, it's like a little microaggression in some ways.
It was so clever, though, because she could have just said, fuck you, and walked out. And that's why I thought it was such an incredible choice, and it was written so beautifully and performed so beautifully, because the other thing is the female expression of anger, because she doesn't want to scream at him in front of the kids as well. She doesn't want to shout.
And sometimes it is those moments that you don't even realise are going to be that powerful, but she just delivered it. So, and Matt's great in it as well, Matt Day, who plays John.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Yeah. Because he's lovable, but he's hurting. He's hurting so badly.
I also loved the way her in her bra was such a moment of intimacy between them, because she's like, I don't give a fuck what you think of me. I'm not trying to be sexy for you or anything like that, because, you usually see a woman in her bra, it's for sort of sexualized reasons. Yeah. But to me, it spoke to the intimacy between the two of them, and also the fact that she just didn't care about him. Yeah, I thought it was
such a brilliant scene.
Yeah, and I thought the driving scene home was really beautiful too, because Alex is sitting next to her and he's just looking. He's trying not to look
in a bra,
lacy black bra.
Awkward. Yeah, exactly.
That brings us to episode 2, which opens on Evelyn's article, the one about I ended my marriage over a flat white going viral. Mia, talk to us about the sensation of going viral.
I've gone viral when I've been cancelled, which is a whole other experience, which we come to later in the show. But your pieces and Holly's pieces are much more, and Claire's pieces are much more likely to go viral than mine. Like often I'll write something and I'll be like, this will be a banger. And it's just
don't you hate
not.
That feeling? I've had feelings where I'm like, here it is, going viral again. And I press publish and it's like 100 people. And I'm like, guys, I think Facebook is broken. Facebook is not broken. People just didn't resonate. But there is a real sense of self-importance of like when you struck a chord and you watch people sharing it and you watch the comments
Well, you're affecting the news cycle.
You're
It's
affecting
incredible.
the news cycle, and what it does for your ego, you're watching it all in real time. There's not a lot of jobs where you can do something and get that immediate sugar rush feedback so quickly and go, yeah, I nailed it today. But what's funny is how quickly that often goes the other way. You've had situations in public when it's something that you've written and people have approached you and said, tried to have those intimate moments.
Oh, that's true. So you're right. I guess I'm more thinking about opinion pieces, but that idea of when you disclose something about yourself and you can end up with a vulnerability hangover. So I guess in the case of Evelyn writing I ended my marriage over a flat white, that wasn't an opinion article. That was a self-disclosure article. And I have had the experience of writing a few of those that have gone viral, like the one about your son growing up and away from you is like the worst breakup you've ever had, and
you've written about
my
anxiety.
miscarriage and anxiety. And the thing that I do, which is different, because I think when you have an opinion article go viral, you feel really self-important.
Yeah.
When I have a self-disclosure article go viral, I could not tell you how uninterested I am in the response.
Really?
I like having connected, like I like knowing that if people are sharing an article that I've written that's about something personal, it means that they've also experienced the same thing. And one of the things we try to do here always, and why I wanted to start Mamamia, is so that women felt seen, heard and understood. And with the article about your son growing up, I put words around something, a feeling that a lot of women had. Same with anxiety, same with miscarriage. And that feels great, but what you have to also be aware of is that you then have a wave of people telling you their stories and telling you how they feel about your story. So when I did one about ADHD, for example, there were a whole lot of people who said that I didn't feel the right way. And the ADHD people were like, you said there was nothing good about it. You were doing terrible things to young people you need to be a role model. You need to say it's a superpower. You can't say it's a terrible thing. And I just wasn't engaged with it. I didn't feel upset about it. I was completely, to be able to write personally on the internet, you have to dance like no one's watching and not be invested in people agreeing with you or approving what you've said.
What we also get to in this is Jeet is sort of the fish out of water character. She's watching it almost with the eyes of the audience going, what is this madness? What we're having is a lot of people embracing the feminist personal essay. Why was it so important to have a character who is seeing this for the first time?
I think Jeet is like a proxy for the audience. So it is really nice to have somebody in that space. And it's only a small office, there's not that many writers in that space. So it's great that Jeet is experiencing this for the first time, because I think there will be a large chunk of the audience that are experiencing this world for the first time as well. And because they are getting into this sort of more confessional style of writing, we thought it would be really fun if there was a character that hadn't really had any of those life experiences that she thought were worthy of an article. And of course, she happens to be sitting next to Opal, who's done everything, So she's feeling intimidated by that. So in episode 2, she lies about, something that's, it's a great headline.
And she's learning the conventions of a headline. And I think that's another sort of idea that gets played with here, is that there are rules. We talked in the writer's room a lot about the unusual rules of a headline. You want the knowledge gap, you want the tension, you want uneven numbers work better than even numbers, less than 90 characters. Like, there was a period where almost every headline had to be almost a riddle, because then you'd click. I remember one.
What happened next?
Or there was one that was like, I had my 2 children 9 months apart. This is how. And it's like, ooh, like, how can you not click on that?
It was really the time of the personal essay. 2012, which is when the show's set, and that era, how did it look from the outside? Because that was kind of a first, but really characterised that time in women's media.
Oh, completely. And I've learnt so much about that period by doing sort of the research into this show. I mean, I was living in the States at the time, so I was reading Jezebel and, the feminist websites like that. And it was huge. And I loved reading it. But there was a sense of lawlessness to those sort of women's websites at the time. And it felt like they were unfiltered. And there was an opportunity for women to be published in that way that they'd never been published before. I mean, what I've found and what I'm still finding incredible about this space is shining a light on taboo topics that traditional media haven't necessarily covered, even our women's magazines. So writing very freely about sex, be it pegging or I've learned a lot about pegging. Abortions, all those things.
Nadir of the genre, everyone agrees, was an article on a website called jane.com, because it was like all the different women's websites were trying to one-up themselves with the most outrageous personal essay.
And we were playing in that space.
Yeah, well, we were too. And a lot of conversations were being had around that time of, is this a good thing for this person? Because people were putting their names to them.
Yeah.
Is this a good thing? Like, we know it's going to be good for clicks, but what is our responsibility to our staff? And someone goes, I really want to write about this. And you're like,
sleep on it.
We'd get so many clicks, but I don't think this would be a good thing for you. And we've said no to a lot of things. But the nadir was this Jane article that was about a young woman, who found a fur ball in her vagina, was from her cat. And somehow her cat slept on her bed or something, and there was hair and it went. And everyone was just like, oh, okay, we've jumped the shark. We need to have a really hard look at ourselves if this is where the genre of women's, first-person essays has gone.
Yeah, I remember the backlash, because it was, and it was, a lot of it was about the responsibility of editors and how exploitative it was getting these writers to sort of rehash their trauma.
And were they all true?
Yeah, well,
exactly.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And that also gets us into the space, which we see for the first time here, how you have people sharing these incredibly candid essays that go viral, and also marrying that with client expectations. So we're pissing off clients, and that comes up a lot. Mia, can you remember, I've got one memory of us it was really hard to sell podcasts in the early days, and we sold a podcast for a lot of money. And Monique Bowley won't mind me telling this story, but she wrote a song for the podcast that week that was just the C word over and over again.
Why was it
I
again?
can't remember, but apparently it was very funny.
There was a reason, of course. If she wrote it, it would have been funny.
But it just had the C word over and over again. Oh, the client was not happy about that one.
Oh, yeah, we know.
And there was another one where we got a big fashion client, and then someone wrote about how they didn't stock. Really valid argument, but like they didn't stock sizes. Their top size was a size 8. Or something, and then we lost them as a client. That's a really interesting space, how you've got the ethics of your feminism alongside the pressures of capitalism to keep the feminist gates open. There's a lot.
It's an ongoing tension, and it's one that's been there for women's media since magazines. I mean, the things that you could and couldn't write about. I mean, even when I wanted to use plus-size models on the cover of Cosmo, it's like a lot of advertisers didn't want to be associated with that. Are we going to lose business? Are we going to lose clients? So it's one thing to make a big statement, a big political statement, a big feminist statement, but if it means that people are going to lose their jobs because there's no money, it's really hard.
The difference with traditional media, of course, is that they don't have to pretend that they're abiding by an ethical or moral code, or they never claim to be feminist. So when you claim to be a feminist, but then you want to sell people a diet, then things start to get really muddy.
And then everyone says you're co-opting feminism and you're profiteering off. Yeah, I know, it's tricky. And then you just look at the US and see that most of those websites that I was talking about reading, like Jezebel and Hairpin and The Owl, they're all closed.
Yeah, and it's a thing of history.
Yeah.
We get to episode 3, which is where we are introduced. This is one of my favourite storylines, actually, is the interns. I really like the interns. Yeah. They're fun. Mia, 2012, very different time, very different landscape. How did internships work back then, and how has it changed?
I mean, everything was different in 2012.
I did an internship at MTV, I reckon, at that time.
Yeah.
And you were at uni, you interned for free.
Of course.
You got incredible work experience, and you got your foot in the door, and fingers crossed you got offered a paid position, right?
Yeah. I think when it changed from being called work experience to interning, but it was essentially the same thing. Like, work experience was seen as something that you do at school, and then interning is something that you do at uni, right? And it was definitely open to being exploited. And magazines used to always run this way. It's like everyone wanted to work in magazines. Magazines would run on interns. So when the bean counters or the official people would walk around the magazine floors counting heads, how many people, you'd have to hide all the interns in the fashion cupboard because it's like, well, there's, 11 other people that work on this magazine, but they're not paid. And some of them would be there for years.
Wow.
And that was really exploitative.
Yeah.
And it also meant that it wasn't very fair because the people who could work for free for years were pretty privileged people.
Which is played with in this episode, definitely. There's it's a sex worker, isn't it, who says, I don't work for free.
Lola Lyons, yeah.
Yeah, that was great. You know, the interns that we've had at Mamamia, and, you know, I started my career doing work experience and then doing an unpaid internship a couple of days a week while I worked other jobs. A lot of people that I know in the media that are my age, in fact, all of them pretty much, started with a degree of unpaid work if they didn't go through an official cadetship, of which there were hardly any.
So this was a moment where that was definitely changing. 2012, I think it was shifting.
It was. And the reason that people don't pay interns or work experience is because in most cases they don't have a lot of skill and they take a lot yet. They might, and they take a lot of time. So
train.
It's seen as an exchange. They get exposure to a workplace and you get maybe some menial things done like coffees. Now, if that exchange doesn't feel fair to either party, you don't do it. That's always been my view. I mean, we were always very strict with our intern programs in terms of it was a 2-week limit that we had that was unpaid, or you could do it 1 day a week over a longer period of time. But people would come interstate to do a 2-week condensed one. And then if you were good at the end of that time, we might offer you casual work, and then you might have some part-time work, and then you might get some full-time work. And that's what happened with you. That's what happened with so many people at Mamamia. It was a great runway.
The other thing that comes up in this episode is they've got like an underwear brand that they need a big idea for. So it's like $250,000 and they're all brainstorming. There's that great brainstorming scene where they're all going to the fridge, which I just love. Sarah, we set ourselves up a bit here because we needed a $250,000 idea, which most
pressure.
no pressure. How do you go about that, going, okay, we've really written ourselves into a hole?
Well, this is where your and Claire's experience was so invaluable, because I could just email you guys and say, hey, quick, I need a tagline or I need a campaign line for this or a brief, and then you would fire back an email with 10 ideas. But I think originally in the room we came up with the slogan with Romina Recurso, who wrote this episode, play like a bitch. And
That's
because
right,
it had to be...
It was about Addie's hockey as well,
So in the first scene of the episode, Addie has a bit of a meltdown on the hockey field and she's kind of aggressive. And then by the end of the episode, she revealed that was because a friend told her she was playing like a bitch. And so when she tells that to Evelyn goes, bing, that's the campaign line. And then I think it was in pre-production that... I can't remember, it might have been Stuart or somebody said, I'm not sure if that's quite smart enough. And I think we have heard that play like a bitch.
Yeah, we probably have
used before. So I think I reached out to you and Claire.
Burn our bras. And that came from Ginny, didn't it?
And I think there was first play. I think you said play like you've got PMS.
Yeah,
that was one, which was brilliant.
That came up. Yeah.
And then there was the leakage pads idea,
Yes.
which was wet, something about wet. Or the wrong kind of wet.
Yeah.
That's right. It was going to be something for a pad.
Yeah, which is also brilliant.
Or incontinence pads or something.
Yes,
the wrong
incontinence
kind
pads.
of wet.
Oh, we've all had to do ads for that.
We have had to brainstorm ideas for those many times.
But we needed it to tie back to the hockey and Addie's sort of aggressive. And so then I think it was Claire that came up with burn our bras, we dare you, which was brilliant and very clever because it was kind of about the durability of these bras, which were like fireproof, strong and tough sports bras. And then, the backlash could have be twofold, people that were, do you know why women burnt their bras in the first place?
And now you're using it to sell us things.
Or then the second backlash is people that had no idea of the history of that term and would think, what are they literally asking people to burn bras? So it was a very clever campaign name.
Issue. Yeah. And you can never sometimes you can't foresee what the fallout is going to be, for an idea that you think's really good, and then you put it out there and you're like, it does look quite obviously bad now, doesn't it? That everyone's looking at it. Sarah, you've consumed women's media for years. You're a feminist. I'm sure you've seen articles and campaigns and television sound bites and maybe even involving Mia where you've seen it and gone, why would you say that? Or how did that come to be? Making this series, did it give you a different perspective? Like, did you feel like you could really get into the room and go, oh, when you're working at that pace under those constraints, this is how it happens?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, I'm a huge consumer of women's media since my first Dolly magazine in the 80s. But yes, I have learnt a lot about the pace, the frenetic pace of it, and having to get, 8 to 12 posts out a day. And yeah, there
was a time when we were doing 60 posts a day.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just going to say, not in this period, not in 2012, but there was a time when everyone the only way to get traffic was to just do 1 million of them. I mean, you can imagine that.
Because it is about quantity. Like the algorithm demanded. It's not now. It's really shifted. But I remember in those earlier years, it was you were wanting to write 6, 7 articles a day, and guess what? Most of them were not quality.
Yeah. Each.
That's crazy.
They were not good.
I think also I've learned, and we did this by the Eve Life tag, which was for all women, was learning that you just can't please all the people all the time, and they can't please all women. Women are all different. So it's just that idea of, you just have to make compromises, I think.
Yeah, you've set yourself up for failure with that kind of ambition sometimes.
And like Mia has always said, you've got to keep the lights on as well. You've got to pay the bills. So there's compromises that have to be made. And I think I'm a lot less judgmental now about reading articles.
You see a typo or a bad feature image and you're like, oh, someone's having a bad day. Thank you so much for joining us on our first episode of Behind the Scenes of Strife, which you can watch now on Binge. Our next instalment, which will cover episodes 4, 5 and 6, will drop here in your Mamamia Out Loud feed tomorrow. So make sure you've watched those eps before listening. And if you came to us from Binge, maybe you've just sat down and watched the whole season of Strife, can I suggest that you become a Mamamia Out Louder? We do Mamamia Out Loud 5 times a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we do our episodes, and then Tuesday and Thursday are subscriber specials. It is myself, Jessie Stevens, Mia Freedman and Holly Wainwright. We are Australia's biggest news and pop culture podcast, and we would love to have you. So come and check out what we do. Bye.